Evening, everybody. Welcome to this event. My name is John Lazar. I am a fellow at the Royal Academy of Engineering. I also chair the Enterprise Committee of the Academy, which is responsible for the Enterprise Hub that we deliver. We're having this panel as a reaction to the recently published independent review of spinouts, and a fantastic report that we'll be discussing in detail. And then we're obviously really pleased that the government has accepted all of the recommendations of the review. I think, as many of you know, the aim of the review was to identify best practice in turning university research into commercial success. And we welcome the recommendations, all of them actually, which echo much of what the Academy and the Enterprise Hub have been calling for. Amongst other things, we've been strongly advocating for some time transparency and greater data sharing, training programs for academics interested in commercializing their research, and a number of other things which have all been addressed by the recommendations. I think the key goal of the Enterprise Hub is to support talented entrepreneurs and decision makers in transforming really key engineering and scientific innovation into disruptive spinouts and scale-ups. So we're very pleased to see that the review strongly advocates the voice of the founder, and we'll be hearing from a key founder this evening. So I guess what we wanted to do today is discuss what in the review has the potential to be transformative, what some of the next steps need to be, and of course, what may be missing. So I'd like to introduce each panelist. Firstly, Professor Kathy Craig, who's CEO of Incisive from Ulster University and also a member of our Enterprise Hub. Secondly, Chaz Bountra, who's Pro-Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Professor of Translational Medicine at the University of Oxford. And worth mentioning that Chaz was directly involved in the review and deputized for Professor Irene Tracy, who was co-chair on a few of the occasions. And then finally, Nathan Balesh, founder and general partner of Enza Capital, who wears a number of other hats, including being responsible as co-author of the absolutely fabulous State of AI report, and who's also had a strong voice on how spinouts should be managed and handled in this country. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'd like to start by asking each of you just to give a really succinct introduction to why you've been interested in the review and a particular area that maybe you find important or impactful. So we'll just go around maybe 1 or 2 minutes each, and let's start with you, Kathy.
I think this review is fantastic. Why is it important for me? Well, I'm a founder. I'm an academic. I spent 20 odd years in academia. I had that burning desire, like a lot of academics probably do, to try and get your research out of the lab so it can make a difference to society in some shape or form. That's not easy. It's really not an easy thing to do. So there's 3 things I think that jump out for me in the review. And of course, they're probably more biased to my opinion as a founder. So one of the things is the training piece, because I think that is number one, the most important thing. Anybody can start a company. We can go start one tonight. But the big difference will be, can you build a successful business on the back of that? And being academics, we have no formal training in that. We're educators first and foremost. So that's really challenging. The next thing that I think is really important there would be the funding part. So as an academic, having the ability to move freely between your academic position, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this later, that funding to allow that porosity or movement between the two is really important as well. So funds that are earmarked for that will give the academic the time that they would need to build a business or to learn the skills required. And the last thing is the recognition for it. And I'm pleased to see in the report the acknowledgement in REF. We all know that REF, the Research Excellence Framework, by which universities are judged, how important that is, how important it is in determining funding for universities, but also in recognition of the quality of research. And to see a spin out or to see commercialization of research take on more, gravitas in that would be fantastic. So those are the things, John, that I welcome.
Well, thanks, Kathy. That's really helpful. Let me go to Chaz next. Chaz, you were deeply involved, and what's your top level take on it all?
Well, thank you, John, and nice to meet all of you. And Nathan, thanks for, I suppose, helping to initiate that whole review. I mean, I'm interested in it, obviously, because, as you imagine, I mean, there's a lot being expected from universities at the moment. People want teaching, research, but increasingly impact. People are looking to the universities to come up with solutions to some of the world's biggest problems. The UK government wants us to be a science superpower. The universities are going to have a major role in that. There are many things, John, I loved about the report, and that's not just because my boss wrote it, but, I love the fact that for the first time we collected a large amount of data. So I think colleagues interviewed more than 600 founders and companies, etc. So that's fantastic. I love the fact that there was a sense that the universities in the UK are working pretty well as a sector. They're sharing best practice, trying to help and support each other, etc. I love the fact that there's a recognition that universities in the UK are very different to the private universities in the US, etc. And that's important. But there were many specific things I loved in it. I love the USIC guidelines for life sciences. I think the 10U did an amazing job on that. Now getting the same team to do that for other areas, I think is fantastic. I love the idea of having a UK version of a sort of a basic out licensing template. I love the idea of having more translational funding, more investors on sort of panels, et cetera, people like Nathan. I think that's going to be incredibly important. So I'm just delighted. I think it's come a long way, and I'm very excited about the future.
Thanks, Chaz. And let me come to you, Nathan. Having thought about this such a lot, what's your take?
So yeah, my take is that the UK is like consistently producing really great first-rate academic research, has like an amazing body of potential entrepreneurs within the university sector, but it's traditionally been a lot weaker on the commercialization side. So a lot of breakthroughs in the sectors that we care about that sort of relate to the government's ambition to be a science superpower are generally trapped. So for me, like fixing the formation of spinouts from this kind of breakthrough research has been very important. That's kind of a personal mission of mine, having kind of grown up through the UK higher education system. So I started kind of working on this 2 years ago with an essay in the FT, kind of pointing out some of the issues that I think we had. Also started the spinout FYI database, which is kind of the only open database of spinout deal terms, which is created using crowdsourcing because there was no other way to get this data. And what was interesting with that and mirrored, and actually even worse in the spinout review, was just like equity take rates, the slow deal timelines, adversarial process, and the rest of it. So that was, I think, very important in driving attention and understanding that, we're not arguing about this for the sake of arguments, but there's actually real data to prove that there was an issue. I think it's also worth noting that we faced a ton of hostility from universities, government, funding bodies, spin-out investors, all sorts of people who did not want the system to change. So I think we've come very, very far away from there. So I think we're really happy to see the government's independent review is kind of stamped, all these policy recommendations that, we've laid out and really tried to make convincing arguments why they make sense. And I think there's a really great kind of roadmap for creating a much more founder-friendly, entrepreneur, friendly UK university environment. As we discussed a bit before, of course, like the work is, not over. We'll have to continually kind of watch this space and encourage universities to really live up to those commitments, because it's just too important for the country's long-term success and success of entrepreneurs to sort of declare victory and kind of move on.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. And obviously fantastic all the work that you put in. I'm going to move on to a little bit more of a deep dive into the different areas and the recommendations, and we should also discuss things that we think may be missing. I'm not going to work through it recommendation by recommendation. there's 11 of them, and they're quite detailed. So let me sort of do more of a run around the houses. I'm going to start with sort of transparency and improving deal terms. So recommendation 2 talks about more data and transparency on spinouts. There are a national register of spinouts, and universities publishing more information about the typical deal terms. Let me come to you first, Chaz. In order to kind of foster that entrepreneurial culture within the universities and between them, what do you think the university actually need to do to execute on this? I mean, what are the steps they have to go through, and how much resistance do you think there will be?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sensing a real massive culture change in Oxford, at least, and I think also across the sector. And you're probably aware, John, a couple of years ago, what we did in Oxford was we recognized that there was some frustration amongst the founders. We recognized the process was taking too long. We recognized that there was a perception that the university was being too greedy. And so what we did was we came up with a guideline, which was basically, we said we wanted to make the process transparent. We wanted to take out the negotiation. We wanted it to be simple and fast and so on and so forth. So we had the following. We said if the university has made a contribution to the creation of the company, so we provided, for example, the salary of the academic or postdocs or students or some infrastructure, in that case, the university will take a 20% equity and the academic gets 80. So it was trying to incentivize the academic. We then said if the university's made no contribution, so no salary, no infrastructure, no postdocs, no students, in that case, we will take 10% and the academic gets 90. So it's either 90% or it's 80% for the academic. It's either or. It's completely transparent. There's no discussion. There's no negotiation. It should be fast. And it's landed really well. And sort of colleagues across here are very excited. And we'll give it another year or so, and then we're going to relook at it again. And, we want to incentivize our colleagues. We want to make the process easier, better, faster, etc. We realize a lot's being expected of us, and we realize the competition we're in globally, etc. So, we will tweak the system as we go along. So I don't anticipate any issues.
But thank you. Kathy, can I come to you? I'm interested, maybe you can discuss for us and for the audience, if you had more transparency and more clarity on what sort of standard deal terms were, how would this have benefited you? Do you think would have been helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to hear what you've implemented in Oxford, and well done for doing that and for showing that type of leadership, because I do think that's really important. So just to give a little bit of context, I was in the situation, it was end of 2017, beginning of 2018, when I was wanting to try and really have a go at commercializing my research. I could see the opportunity with the advancements in VR technology. Suddenly it was becoming affordable, which meant we could embed our know-how into products. So when I approached the technology transfer office, we did, of course, the iCure thing, whatever that I think everybody does. It was really not that helpful. Anyway, what we did was we spoke to them. I had no idea what was involved. Somebody pointed me to an independent program that was taking place in Northern Ireland at the time that was Invest NI had funded, which was run by Ignite, which is an excellent program based, I think, in the northeast of England. Anyway, Tristan Watson, who was CEO of that time, because the university had come back to me and said, look, if you're going to make the company, we'll be taking 25%. And I'm like going, right, okay, 25%. So what does that mean? Does that mean I sort of buy out my time? Does it mean I've got a lab? Does it mean I can take my postdoc, even though I'd fund it from my reserves? No, none of that. And I'm like, oh, but what do I get then? And it was more or less the right to start the company. And then I said, well, what about my time? What about protecting my time? What about all of these things? Oh, you'd need to negotiate that with your head of school. I said, what if they say no? Oh, well, that's between you and them. So it was extremely confusing for me. And then when I would ask other colleagues, it would be very different. Some maybe had royalty agreements because they were licensing something. Others just ignored the university and started a company anyway. So there was every sort of nuance and mixture of startups that I spoke to. And it was really Tristan Watson who pulled me aside. And when I was doing that program, I would have probably signed because I didn't know any better. And he said, Kathy, if you give away 25% equity now, it's going to be very difficult for an investor to come on board. They're not going to be interested. They don't want to see somebody from a university on a board and they're not really contributing anything. So in a way, thanks to Tristan, it made me think more about it, look into it more, educate myself a little bit more. And cut a long story short, that institution I was at, we parted ways because it was going to be complicated for me to continue with this startup and have my full-time academic job at that time. So we agreed to disagree and parted ways, and they agreed that I could start the company independently of them. So to be honest, this would have really helped me because that was a huge risk to take at that time in my life. And everything. So, I really do welcome this, and transparency, I think, is key.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. And just making it very clear for people when they start. So let's come into the template. So this is buried under a very big recommendation one, which is all around accelerating towards an innovation-friendly set of university policies. And I think the interesting piece there is the recommendation that universities, investors, founders should jointly build on the use of guidance to develop a template for spinout term sheets to help streamline the process. Nathan, I'd like to come to you. So firstly, do you anticipate a template like that would be widely adopted? Secondly, what would you put in it? And then I know you've got some reflections on the speed of deals. What else do we need to actually build around that to make sure that we improve efficiency and speed of deals?
I've been very pro standards and templates because I think the study of business in general shows you that standardization is a net good thing. The context is, however, that most of the actors believe that every deal is bespoke, so every deal has to get negotiated, which becomes very, very slow. So at the end of the day, actually, the slow deal timelines are probably the biggest problem. And then equity is perhaps like the second one under the kind of old system. And, unfortunately, when you're working on the frontier of any, new breakthrough technology, it's just hugely demanding on your competitiveness to spend 9 to 10 months kind of negotiating with various parties, especially in a setting that's generally untransparent and most of the time, frankly, adversarial. And we, pushed for a open deal terms because none of this data is available. At most universities, you go on their website and they don't tell you what their, what founders should expect, which is quite bizarre. And the second thing is push for standards. So, we proposed this simple agree, which is spinout, kind of stylized after the, SAFE agreement that God knows how many founders sign when they start their company to raise money, and is super efficient. And in that kind of SaaS agreement, if you will, we think it's important to just stipulate, the equity, royalty, any kind of licensing fee, any potential exit fee if there is one, and ideally just pick one method of monetization, not more, and pick the one that most reflects how value accrues in the company. So if it's a technology company, it's mostly probably equity value. If it's a biotech company, it's probably mostly royalties because the drugs are what's valuable. And then, put an SLA, which just says this process has to be done in 3 months, end to end, or pick your number on say at least 3 months or less. And then just rubber stamp this, throughout the industry. Because I don't think anybody really enjoys going through protracted legal negotiation on minutiae. I think we're all in this hopefully to build impactful, cool technology that will be material for all of our lives. And so I think the job just becomes more fun when you can kind of get to company building rather than negotiation. So that's what we propose. So, we're very, very pro standardization.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, the site really has transformed the investor landscape, even if there are bits about it one doesn't necessarily like. And I think if we can, as a community, come together and get the template right, it will make an absolutely enormous difference. Kathy, I was going to...
Mike, could I...
Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
John, could I just make a comment? I thought Nathan said something I think incredibly important. Well, lots of things are incredibly important, but one thing in particular, I mean, sort of Nathan just said sort of, we want to be impactful and we want to have a material effect on all of our lives, etc. And I should say, I mean, the primary reason that I believe, well, we in this university, but I believe across the sector, that we're pushing this activity is because we do want to create more impact with our research. The secondary driver is getting financial benefits for the university. So, just to be clear.
Yeah, thank you. That's a useful intervention. I want to go on to interesting comment in a recommendation in the report around shared tech transfer offices. So this is a recommendation for, particularly for smaller research universities, to create shared TTOs, doing that regionally or sector-wide. And actually an interesting comment in that the sector-wide ones may particularly be of interest to spinouts that are coming from social sciences, humanities, and the arts, which was an interesting mention in the report. Shaz, I want to come to you on that. The government response to the review states it will launch a pilot shared TTO. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how would we make that happen, and which stakeholders would you get involved in that?
I mean, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think if you don't have enough resources or something is difficult or you don't have enough expertise, I think it's good to create critical mass by pooling resources, sharing best practice, learning from each other, getting rid of any duplication, helping each other, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think in Oxford, we're fortunate that we've grown a sizable TTO, but I appreciate that there are many universities that don't have that, and they are sort of coming together to sort of share best practice, et cetera. And, we're here to help. I mean, we've made lots of mistakes. We've learned lots of lessons. We're happy to share all of those. One of the things, John, I did like, I mean, sort of a scheme that UKRI set up a few years ago was the Connecting Capability Fund. So this was trying to get universities to work together. And I think that's been a phenomenal success. I mean, even this afternoon, talking to, the PBC for Research in Liverpool, Anthony, he was telling about his Prosper project. In Oxford, we did a UK spine project working with Dundee and Manchester and Birmingham and the Crick, etc. Just recently, my colleagues in OUI, our tech transfer group, they worked with lots of other TTOs to get a fund for social sciences, called Impact 12, etc. So I think it's happening. I mean, I love the idea of sort of pooling expertise and, creating that critical mass.
Yeah, actually, interestingly, I mean, not mentioned in the report, but we at the Academy set up a new enterprise hub in Wales recently. And there is actually a fantastic organization called Agor IP, which is coming out of Swansea University, which is now doing, a kind of regional tech transfer job across a number of institutions in Wales. So one of the follow-ups I actually think would be to get Agor IP to share their expertise. I do also think this thing around social sciences or just bringing arts and design is interesting. My own personal experience of some of you will probably be aware of the fantastic joint masters that Imperial and the Royal College of Arts have run. And some of the most interesting people coming through the Academy's Enterprise Hub I've mentored too that came through that master's program, and they are absolutely phenomenal. And that kind of joint cross-disciplinary approach, I think, makes a big difference. So let's go to founder skills. This is recommendation 7. And this is a really strong recommendation that founders need access to support from individuals and organizations with experience of operating successful high-tech startups. And the existing landscape needs both consolidation and targeted expansion. I mean, I think that's a quite clear recommendation with a good answer from the government. Kathy, I was going to come to you. To recommend several things founders need, like advice on negotiations, entrepreneurship training, access to facilities, etc. In your experience, what needs to happen in addition to all of this? And have you experienced training, through your journey that was particularly good or useful?
Yes. So from my perspective, what's been really, really important is the enterprise hub, to be honest. I had done the starting program, which was really helpful to give me an idea of what to do. But it's one of those things that you'll only be receptive to the training when you've reached that stage in your business. So at the very beginning, you hear all of this stuff, but none of it makes sense because you're not there and it's not relevant to you. So for me, the Enterprise Fellowship's been fantastic. And I remember when I was contacted about it, I was like, seriously, does this program exist? Because I had been looking for something. As I said, as an academic, I had no formal training in this area, no formal business training. If anything, commercialization is something you never talked about. It was almost like a dirty word. You sort of got grants, you wrote papers, you supervised students, and you did things really for free almost. So that was a very important thing. So yes, all that knowledge around building a business, but for me, probably the most valuable thing has been access to the network. So being based in Northern Ireland, whilst, technology transfer offices are fine, they're probably good to get you started. There's so much more to running a business and having a startup and a successful startup. So you mentioned the social sciences. I'm a psychologist. So, there again, I use technology though to sort of implement my ideas. So that cross-disciplinary piece can be very, very difficult to have sometimes. And I just felt that the Enterprise Fellowship provided me with the training, but also the mentorship and the coaching. And that was really invaluable to me, and the access to the network across all of the UK. So being able to come to London, to be able to meet people, or for somebody in the hub to connect me with somebody else, that's been really, for me, what's been fantastic. To speak to other founders, other academics who've done it, it's actually that access to role models that's really important.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's probably worth mentioning. I mean, for those people who don't know, the Enterprise Hub offers multiple programs for people at different stages, but a very strong program for the stage that you were at. And it is based around the unique network from the academy. So you get assigned a mentor who's a fellow, you get a bunch of smart and flexible training, unique mentoring capability, and then crucially, the academy doesn't take any equity or fees because formally it's constituted as a charity. There's one statistic which I think is really interesting, which we did feed into the report, but we've actually supported through the Enterprise Hub, I think 10% of UK spinouts. And so that's a decent number, and it's a good program. And I want to get into the nitty gritty of equity stakes and investments. And I'm going to come to you first on this one, Nathan. So the review, firstly, the review says that attracting finance was stated as a key barrier for founders starting spinouts, and I think it was 22% of founders didn't agree that deals negotiated were balanced and fair. So it's always been a contentious issue. In terms of equity stakes, the review interestingly distinguishes between life sciences, engineering and hardware and software. Life sciences having the highest uni equity stake, which does reflect the more hands-on role that universities often play in those projects. And then obviously software spinouts the lowest, in part because they tend not to have patents and so on, with engineering and hardware somewhere in the middle. Nathan, I want to come to you. The review identifies use of guidance as a good starting point, and it says somewhere between 10 to 25% equity for life sciences spinouts. Do you think that sounds about right? What would you do for hardware and engineering? And would you wind it back for software? So what's your thinking on the kind of range you'd be looking at for that?
So my perspective is just to look at it from, I have a first principles point of view, and what are we ultimately trying to achieve? So I think ultimately we're trying to achieve it is as many large scale, independent, important companies that ship innovation from universities into the public domain. Secondarily, successful alumni that then come back and mentor future generations, et cetera, businesses that pay tax, capital gains tax, all that stuff in the UK. And then, maybe you might make some money on the company itself. So from that point of view, my view on equity terms is really that we shouldn't create special interest groups, because then every special interest group thinks that they're an exception, and then their term should be slightly different. So for me, like the point of, okay, a life science company is like more expensive, quote unquote, to sort of ultimately create is a bit moot. So I would not distinguish, because ultimately you just want a big company. You want to make it as frictionless to make a big company as possible. So my point of view is like 10 to 25 is too high. I'm personally reluctant to give much credit to UCIT on this, because I think 25% is like unreasonable and is significantly above international standards. And I'm not a fan of it. I don't think any founder is really a fan of it. So I think it should be like no more than 0 to 10. I don't think putting floors of 10 make any sense if a university provides no value, because I think objectively that's just called a tax. And I don't think we want to tax entrepreneurs. And then I wouldn't play around with a golden share or non-dilutable. I would just go straight dilutable, straight common, make it as simple as possible. And I think, the more like successful big companies you create, the more money your university will get. And I think the US system has proven that over and over again. That would be my take.
Well, Chaz, let me come to you. Obviously, given your previous comments, but also your thoughts around the distinction between life sciences on the one side and then software on the other end.
Yeah, I mean, my comment was sort of, when I was chatting with Ian Walmsley, who's a good friend, and he was formerly in Oxford, as you know, and he's now at Imperial, he made a very interesting comment. He said, when we allow academics to do entrepreneurial activity, we're allowing them to do sort of high-risk activity in a secure environment, sort of the university continues to pay their salary. Where else would that happen, etc. So I do consider that we're in a privileged position, actually. And so I don't look upon it as the university imposing a tax. In terms of the comment about sort of, I respect Nathan's view, but sort of when we decided to go for 10 or 20%, we did think about going for a lower figure, which was not diluted. But actually what happened when we spoke to a number of investors in the UK, they pushed back on that. And it's also fair to say, again, talking to my colleagues in our TTO, but also Ian's team in Imperial, their sense is that when we take, say, 20-25%, which is diluted, by the time it gets to sort of Series A, it's going to end up at sort of 3-5%, comparable to some of the universities in the US. But of course, it's also worth saying that sort of some of the universities in the US, Stanford, Harvard, Stanford's got an endowment of $75 billion. Harvard's got an endowment of $72 billion. You imagine every year, even at 5%, they're going to be making $3.5 billion. $3.5 billion is more than the total running cost of the whole of the University of Oxford, including all of its 39 colleges. So, I want us to be like Stanford and Boston, et cetera, but I appreciate that we're trying to play catch up. They've been doing this for 3-4 decades. Stanford's got several companies on the doorstep which are worth more than $1 trillion. Those companies are pumping money into Stanford. There's lots of job opportunities for kids in Stanford in those companies. There's 1,000 billionaires in the US giving money to those universities, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very different environment. So this is why I said right at the outset, one of the pleasing things for me was in this review, a recognition that in the UK as a sector, we're doing well. We are getting better. We are being more ambitious. We are helping each other. We are learning from each other and supporting each other. And we're different to the US.
Okay, I kind of interject. I think, I think Chaz brings a really important point. And I think the vantage point, I think it is worth flipping it basically. So instead of saying like, the US has this, the UK doesn't have this, therefore we should behave differently. Why is it that UK universities don't have endowments I mean, universities in this country are sometimes hundreds of years older than American ones. Like, it's not that the US like realized something that's impossible to implement in the UK. Like, it's perfectly implementable. And I think the whole point is like, the more successful alumni you create and the happier alumni you create, the more they will give you money. And I think if you create unhappy customers because the deal is not good, they're never going to give you money. And then you're going to get stuck in this endless cycle going down. And then I think, and this was the core argument of my essay like 2 years ago, which is basically that universities are monetizing the wrong customer. Like, you shouldn't be monetizing founders of companies; you should be monetizing your alumni. And I think this is the big difference philosophically. And the reality is, like, you know, Lazar produces like loads of really wealthy people. Like, there's fantastic alumni there, but if they're not donating, then there's a problem with how they perceive the product. And this is the same thing across most UK universities. So I see this like a big opportunity to like really reboot how we're going to create alumni in the future who will be successful. And, you know, the last thing I was just say on this is like the UK kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem, you know, as John knows very well, is like very, very young. Like, we haven't been through that many cycles of like billionaires, et cetera. Whereas in the US we have. And so I think we sort of haven't seen like the full long-term ramifications of not creating a setup that's pro-entrepreneur. I think once you've kind of created the setup which is anti-entrepreneur, it's too late. Like, too many of them will emigrate to the US and go elsewhere. So I think this review like really gives us a shot to like go back to kind of step one and say, like, doesn't matter what other ecosystems are doing, like, what is the world's best setup that we can have in the UK? And I'm like super excited about that because it makes like so much sense to me. And I hope we'll run that experiment.
Well,
I think Taz, I know you're probably going to come back on that, but in the interest of time, I think that's a fantastic debate, and we're going to be keeping that debate moving forward. I want to move on to distribution of funding, because the report clearly highlights the fact that, you know, while there has been a growth in funding overall, there's a regional imbalance with equity funding particularly concentrated in the Southeast. Kathy, I want to come to you. Like, did you find this a real problem when you were fundraising? I mean, is this something that strikes quite hard for you? Do you notice it?
Yes. I think for me, there's the double whammy, being based in Northern Ireland and then being a female founder as well. I think those make it doubly hard. I mean, we still haven't raised. We're about to close a round in January 2020, and that part of that round had come through the Immersive Tech Accelerator run by Innovate UK. We had to find one of the venture capitalists to come on board. They'd named only 11. We were only eligible, I think, for 3 of those, one based in Northern Ireland. It then transpired that their funds were also EU funds, so we couldn't use them. We had to then go find angels at the last minute. We've managed to find 2 angels. The angels couldn't agree heads of terms with the VC. That meant we couldn't unlock the Innovate UK funding. So our 450k round just fell flat on its face in January 2020 with COVID hitting 2 months later. So there were dark days, and basically it sort of like became like, okay, we've no choice here. We just have to keep going with what we've got, trying to find some more grants and bootstrap our way through. So yes, I think there's a huge issue here, particularly for regions, and it's access to that funding as well. And, you know, I think that Innovate UK Accelerator, the principle was very good because it gave me the seal of approval to say this has been quality assured. They've looked at the quality of it. They think it's passable here. Now I just need somebody else. And it de-risked it for a venture capitalist as well. So I think more things like that could help maybe slightly more disadvantaged groups like myself to break through, and probably because our tech isn't the standard sort of tech. So VCs don't really know what to do, or investors don't really know what to do with it. So we do experience that, I suppose, as well.
Yeah,
there is a thing now with the north and south of Ireland, though. I was just down in Dublin last week, and there's a huge opportunity, I think, there to be looking more at that ecosystem. There's quite a lot of money around there as well. So I think, we need to maybe think a bit more creatively about how we unlock funding and investment.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And in the same vein, I wanted to come to you, Chas, because on recommendation 9, there's a recognition of the important role that the university affiliated funds have played in helping spinouts from some regions access finance. Do you think, Can you talk about what the action here should be on trying to get those affiliated funds scaling up more, attracting more investors, creating more competition, just to sort of heighten their importance? I mean, any thoughts on that from the Oxford perspective?
It's a great question, John. I mean, so as colleagues are probably aware, in Oxford, we created a fund. It was called Oxford Science Innovation Fund about 7-8 years ago. It was £614 million, but it was purely for Oxford academics and researchers to translate their science. And frankly, the creation of that fund was transformational. So prior to the creation, John, in 2014, the university was maybe doing 4 or 5 companies a year. As soon as we created that fund, it went up to more than 20. A couple of years ago, we did 31 companies. Those companies, in 2021, actually brought in 1.4 billion of VC funding. So it's phenomenal. But that fund has now attracted more than 200 co-investors. So, I often think of OSC as almost being an anchor investor, and now lots of investors are coming into the ecosystem to play. And but frankly, John, the challenge we've got at the moment, in Oxford, we're doing so much stuff in healthcare, climate, social enterprise, humanities, inequality, et cetera, et cetera. Even with OSC, we don't have the scale of funding that we need. I mean, we've now created 300 odd companies that sit around the university. They're all growing. But what we now need to do is to scale some of them up. Going back to Nathan's point, we need to grow them to sort of 10, 30, 50, 100 billion, because that's when they really have massive impact. And that's when they create lots of jobs. And that's when they create lots of tax revenue, et cetera. And that's what the UK government is after if we're going to be a UK science superpower, et cetera. So what we're now doing, John, is putting a lot of thought into how do we bring in even more investors into Oxford? We need them at pre-seed, seed, A, B, C, scale up, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm opening my arms to anybody.
Thank you. Well, I'm gonna break off. I've got a few more questions actually, but I think we've got a couple of interesting ones coming in from people who are from our audience. So first, there's a question from Adam. Can the panel please quantify what they consider to be a realistic target number of weeks from academic founders expressing a desire to spin out desired terms? Maybe I'm going to come to you on that one because you were actually talking about this. Do you have like I think you said 3 months, but is that your preferred target? I do know that I was in California earlier this year and we went to visit Berkeley, and they aim to have a license agreement in a week. So, we could try and get to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to get to that. Like, I'm cool with 1 week. We can set that as the SLA.
Well, if I think realistic, what do you think is realistic?
I mean, I think realistically, of course, a founder who shows up to a university tech transfer office and says, "I want to start a company," is not uniformly the same. Like, they might have, the ducks in a row. They actually understand what it takes. They maybe have some investors in mind. Then they have some co-founders. They know what they want to do. And then there's others that are kind of read about it on the internet and say they want to go do something, or probably not, fit at that point in time to go start a company. But if we assume that somebody's pretty clued up, has a plan, has a deck, whatever, then, I don't necessarily see why you can't work through it in a couple of weeks. We do pretty complex transactions on the venture side in a couple of weeks if we have to. So I think it's totally manageable. And in the US, these, you'll have these express licenses for, very easy cases where it's off the shelf, and there might be cases you might take a bit more. But the key thing is it's in no one's interest to take too long.
Do you have a view from the Oxford side what a reasonable target would be?
It's a good question, John. I'm not going to give you a specific answer. The one thing I will say is that sort of, it takes a little while just to ascertain whether the academic has actually got some IP or is there a patent, etc. And I know there's a lot of discussion also about sort of, because we have to agree with the people who have funded that research, if the Wellcome Trust or NIHR or MRC. So I think some of the time is there. So I'd love to give you, I will give this some serious thoughts, and I will follow up with my colleagues, and I'd love to have a one-to-one with Nathan on this, because it's something I do worry about, but I think we need to make an improvement on, but I don't know the numbers at the moment.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I've got a question from Patrick, a sort of double-headed question, which I'm going to throw to Kathy. What skill sets will be crucial for employees within UK spinouts in the future? And then based on that, how can UK spinouts position themselves globally to compete with other international companies, organizations doing similar work? So your experience, you're in Italy right now, you said.
Yeah.
Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. And, myself personally, every day is a school day. I'm still learning. Every day I learn about it. I say, don't bother doing an MBA, just start a company, because you'll do all the modules at some stage or other, and in depth, and pass or fail is whether your business succeeds or not. In terms of the employees, what I do and what we do in Incisive, and I think, again, the Enterprise Hub in Belfast is fantastic for this, is because we've got access to, obviously, the universities there. I'm obviously partly involved in Ulster, but we've got brilliant courses and very great students there that are looking for opportunities. And Nathan mentioned this too. And I think this is where a lot of the universities miss the big picture. We mentioned earlier about universities wanting to make money. I don't think that's what it's about. It should still be about education. So we create apprenticeship roles within our organization, internships for students. They'll come in, they'll get skills, they'll get upskilled whilst they're there. They learn about what startup life is like. That might then give them the desire and the hunger to go and do their own thing as well. So the skills that you need are really grit, determination, and the ability to sort of be resilient, I suppose, as well, but flexible and creative in solutions, and pivot if you need to. Those are the things that I've realized and learned.
No, well, thank you. I wanted to, this is picking up another question that's come in, but I think it's worth throwing aside just to get people's take on it. And Chaz kind of mentioned this in terms of really, really large scale funding. Do any of you have a strong view on the Mansion House reforms and how we get the weight of the City of London to invest in early stage companies, how we can move that along? Any thoughts and inputs on that? Nathan, maybe come to you first.
Yeah, mine's perhaps a bit controversial in a sense that, last year in 2022, there was 24 billion pounds that was raised by British technology companies, and just doing some analysis, I think it's less than 5% went to companies that emerged from universities. So I think my perspective is we're kind of looking at it the wrong way. It's not that we don't have capital to invest in spinouts. It's just that the spinouts are not good enough, because capital will go to where the good opportunities are. So if spinouts are not getting it, it's because they're not good or they're not set up for success. And so at the global stage, I think, there's plenty of evidence that shows that, at the later stage, there's plenty of evidence that shows that funding comes from global sources. And seed tends to be more local just by virtue of the support, et cetera, that most companies need. I think it's definitely a net positive, to see the Mansion House reform, and particularly on the LP side, right, to really bring institutional capital that is local to invest in venture funds that are local. I think it's definitely a big tragedy that most institutional investors in Europe, not just in the UK, will barely invest in European venture. And yeah, we all want to have a flourishing European ecosystem, but it's bizarre that we don't support our own teams. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that change in the pension industry and the banking industry.
Chaz, anything to add from your side?
Well, I'm maybe more optimistic than Nathan. I think some of the spinouts we've now got, and please come and look at the Oxford's portfolio, some of them I think are just stunning. And they are going to scale up. They are going to be massive companies. I completely agree with Nathan that talent and money is global. If we have good ideas in wherever, I think we will get the money from the US or wherever it is, etc. I welcome what colleagues like John Simons and John Bell have been doing around trying to get sort of more of this sort of pension funds and so on. I do know my colleagues in OSE, for example, one of our spinouts is a company called First Light Fusion. And the discussion they're having is, it's not about, do we put in another 10 million or 20 million? The question is, how do we put in another 500 million? And that's just an example of the scale of funding we need if we're going to crack some of these big global challenges like green energy or carbon capture or biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm optimistic, John.
We've had a couple of questions about this, but also I was setting this question because I think one of the really interesting things that came up in the recommendation was coming back to proof of concept funds. This is recommendation 5. The government should increase funding for proof of concept funds to develop confidence in the concept prior to spinning out. And then the government responded saying it will provide an additional £20 million for, I think it's a new cross-disciplinary proof of concept research program to be delivered by UK RI. So I'm interested in perspectives on this, and how do we make these proof of concept funds more productive in terms of outcomes per spend or £1 million at a time? Kathy, I don't know whether you've got any initial thoughts on that, but this has been super helpful for you earlier on. Do you have any view on the impact?
Well, I think what I've seen with proof of concept funds in the past is you'll have academics applying for them thinking, oh yeah, I've got an idea, but they're just using it as grant money to continue to fund a postdoc and to continue to do what they normally do. And it isn't really to do a business. So I don't agree with that being the proper thing. Yeah. I mentioned earlier the Innovate UK investment accelerators. I think something along those lines. So it's a bit like a grant, but you also then have the investment you bring in alongside. So, I wouldn't agree with what Nathan said about spinouts not being good enough from the university. I think they are, Nathan. I think the problem is they don't know how to communicate or speak investor language. And I don't think they know how to maybe make it into a proper business. And that's where that collaborative piece comes in. What I worry about VC funding sometimes is they don't actually understand the business they're investing in, so can't see the flaws or can't see it. They jump on bandwagons like AI and all of these things, but maybe don't have the depth of knowledge to really understand, is that a proper concept that has got legs or not? So I think there's that fine balance to be done. I think something that brings the two together would be really useful. So there's more confidence in the concept, but yet also in the ability to build a business.
That's an interesting question following on from Tamsin, actually. She was asking from the audience, following on from what you just said, is there a role for business schools in supporting academic enterprises through internal training programs? I can see Nathan shaking his head and Chaz nodding his head. So we have a sort of immediate, and Kathy doesn't think so. Kathy, you want to come back first?
Yeah, no, I mean, with all due respect, I think a lot of this is like consultants. I've had my fill of consultants, and I saw what Steve Jobs once said about consultants as well. So I think yourself, you have to be in the business. You have to understand it. You have to have got the scars, the startup scars yourself. So I think those people who can bring value there are the people who've been there, done that, because it's one thing doing a module in a class in the evening. It's another thing living it on a daily basis and trying to build your business on the back of it. So no, I would sort of say no.
Yeah, I guess I fall somewhere in the middle. I mean, I have actually seen some good programs. I don't want to bang the drum too much for Chaz, but the one experience I have had is mentoring at the Creative Destruction Lab in Oxford, where the Said Business School master's program, people coming to a master's program gets to sit through that and actually get involved in quite practical stuff. And I know that Judge in Cambridge does similar things. So yeah, but overall, I think, yeah, and Nathan and Kathy shaking heads on that one.
Can I comment, John?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I mean, I think Kathy touched on earlier about the importance of role models, and Nathan talked about success stories, and I think that's incredibly important. As this ecosystem evolves and matures, we will have more role models and more success stories. 20 million for this proof of concept. Okay, I would have been great if it was 200 million, but I think it's a start. Even if it funds, I don't know, let's say 40 groups with 500,000 each, And in a couple of years, those are creating some big success stories. I think that's fantastic. In a couple of years' time, we can go back to government and ask for a larger slug. But I just think of this as a maturing ecosystem. It's getting better and better. We're catching up Boston and Stanford, but let's be ambitious. Let's help each other. Let's support each other.
Very good. I do want to also come back on the point that Kathy made, because I think this is an important point. And I actually agree overall with the point you made about many VCs not really understanding the depth of the research and engineering that's coming out of the universities. There are a number like Nathan who are deeply embedded in the core of the research and understand the value that it brings. But it's certainly true with the companies that come to the Enterprise Hub, many of whom are doing very IP-rich, quite complex engineering problems, tackling very, very sort of big, grand challenges. They really, really need a place where they're going to get that kind of very knowledgeable support for the programs and the projects that they're putting together. And that can't always be done by the mainstream of the VC industry. I think that's actually important. Very good. Well, I think we are just about coming to a close. I think I've just asked everything I wanted to ask. I know there were a pile more questions coming in, which we're not going to be able to get to. I'm just going to give any of you, if you have anything you finally want to add, I'll throw it over to you. Kathy, anything from your side?
Yeah, so I mentioned it very briefly at the start. For me, what I'd love to see is more funding specifically for female entrepreneurs, because I think, again, we're missing a trick. I get really quite annoyed by the Innovate UK Women in Innovation Fund. I applied for it. I didn't the first time, I did the second time. That is £50,000. So they have, I think, 7.6 million they've spent, but that's supported 152 women. With 50,000, what can you do? Absolutely not much. So basically, you have to be a role model as well. You have to do all the things, which I'm a big advocate for. But I think if we're really serious about that, we need serious funds in behind it. Things, again, like that investment accelerator that are specifically for women that probably do need slightly different tailoring and bespoke sort of investment packages as well. The research that came out from DocuSign shows that VCs spend different times on different parts of the day, whether it's a male or a female entrepreneur. These are biases that exist in our society. So anyway, anything they could do to help that would be fantastic.
Completely agree with that. Shaz, anything to end with from your side?
Well, John, I would just say that I think as a country, we've got an amazing track record. We've got some amazing infrastructures in this country. We've got some wonderful, unique resources. Just this afternoon, I was talking to colleagues around the UK Biobank, Genomics England, etc. These are world-leading resources. I think let's be confident, let's be ambitious, let's realize synergies, let's help each other, support each other. I am confident that in 5 years' time, this sort of activity will be a magnitude greater than it is now. And we are catching up Boston and Stanford, and we're going to learn from them, and we're going to do things better and differently.
Thank you. Nathan, any final thoughts from you?
I'm generally excited for the future. I think we have a huge opportunity to change an under-reformed system, and I think if we seize it, we've got a big shot at changing the way research is commercialized. So it's predicated on universities doing the right thing, and I hope they chose to do that and implement the spirit of their recommendations. And the future is pretty bright.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I had the great privilege of being into Enterprise Hub Showcase last Thursday and seeing 12 pictures of absolutely phenomenal world-class engineering and research coming to fruition. So I think we do have remarkable top-level research in our universities, and we need to make the most of it. So thank you very much to all of you. I think the consensus that I'm picking up from the evening, great progress with the reports, fantastic to see the government recommendations coming out, but it is worth saying we still have a lot of work to do, not least to clarify what we mean by deal terms and templates and so on. But very importantly, I think as a community, we all need to get together and make sure now that the momentum is not lost. And we ensure that we do actually deliver on the recommendations and we ensure the implementation. And I'll be pushing hard from the academy side to make sure that happens. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Thank you.
John.
Hey, thank you.
See you, Nathan.
Bye.
All the
Yeah.
best. Bye-bye.